All right, shalom, shalom. First and foremost, giving honor and praise to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov. Giving double honors to 7130 South Chicago that taught me this truth. Giving double honors to all the brothers and sisters that the Creator has awoken in these last days. With that being said, peace and shalom. All right, brothers and sisters, I want to go over some brief history. We're going to entitle this The Times of the Gentiles Part 4. We're going to be going over brief history, dealing with the Berlin Conference and other history just as well. So let's take a look at this. It says the Berlin Conference. It says of 1884, 1885 was a meeting of colonial powers that concluded with the signing of the General Act of Berlin, an agreement regulating European colonization and trade in Africa during the new imperialism period, right? So what do we go at to kind of take a look at this? Let's come out of here. Let's go to the Daniel 7. All right. Daniel 7 reads, "And after this I saw in a nice vision, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. And it devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped with the residue of the feet of it. And it was diverse from all the beasts that was before it, and it had 10 horns." And see, the 10 horns started out as what you would call the ancient. Well, we would say the ancient 10 horns was the Visigoths, the Franks, the Vandals, the Suvia, the Herculi, and all these different quote-unquote Caucasian nations that came up out of the Caucasus Mountains, right? But it has metastasized into what we would call the European Union, because the European Union consists of Britain, France, Luxembourg, Belgium, I think I said France, Italy, the Netherlands, and so on and so on. And what's happening is these countries, what they're going to do is they're going to colonialize, quote unquote, Africa and throughout the whole world. They're going to control a lot of stuff. It's because, when they set up the European Union, I believe that they set that up in the 1900s. After, I believe, the Second World War. But when we looking at this is before the First and the Second World War. So they had already been colonizing the world way before this. And see, all these nations here are nothing but quote-unquote Gentiles, because like I said before, the term Gentile comes from the 10th chapter of the book of Genesis, right, dealing with the children of Japhet. And contrary to popular belief, that the Euro-Gentile or the Europeans that we look at today are the children of Japhet. And their ancestors go all the way back to so-called black people too, because the black man and the black woman is the parent stock of the whole planet. So, let's not forget that. But over a period of time, the Creator is going to bring on different nations and things of this nature. And see, when we're looking at the Europeans are basically the children of the so-called black man, right? because Japheth, Shem, and Ham were also called black people, brothers and sisters. So when it says an agreement regulated European colonization, see, when Yahshua is speaking during the time of Luke 21:24, Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. See, he was talking about, when he made that statement, he was talking about how the Romans was going to come in and they was going to take over. And then also he's talking about, quote unquote, the transatlantic slave trade, brothers and sisters, believe it or not, too. He's referring to that because it says that basically the saints, which is the nation of Israel, they're going to be scattered throughout the four winds. So that's talking about the transatlantic slave trade also. So it says the conference of 14 countries was organized by Otto von Bismarck, the first chancellor of Germany, at the request of Leopold II of Belgium. It met on 15 November 1884, and after adjournment concluded 26 in February 1885 with the signing of the General Act. So what's taking place? They all came to an agreement to come to Africa and different parts of the world and bite up everything that's over there in the country. They're going to control the natural resources and all type of stuff, because I think Berlin is over there in Germany. So these are the Germans coming together to come up with a situation where they can come over there to Africa too and to take advantage of the natural resources. It says the General Act of Berlin can be seen as the formalization of the scramble for Africa, right? Let's take a look into that. It says the scramble for Africa was the invasion, conquest, and colonization of most of Africa by 7 European powers driven by the Second Industrial Revolution. And like I said, and I had to put myself in this, we have to start to go back and to read this history. See, that's the only way you're going to really understand what's going on. You talking about prophecy and things of this nature, you have to have some type of vast understanding of history. So when the Mashiach made this statement, let's turn to it. Luke 21:24. It says, and they shall fall by the edge of the sword, talking about the nation of Israel, and shall be led away captive into all nations. Because what's happening is the nation of Israel, they got to fulfill Deuteronomy the 28th chapter, verses 68. See, they got to fulfill that. So what happened? Titus comes in, they ransack Jerusalem, and what happened with our people is that we fled throughout the interiors of Africa, and also you had some of us that went captive up under the Romans too, because mind you, Yahshua was born in captivity under the Romans. See, but it was in AD 70. That's when Titus come in and fully take over Jerusalem. See, so when the Messiah is speaking like this, he's talking about future events that's going to take place. It says, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. See, so when he's talking about Gentiles, he's not talking about Nebuchadnezzar, the first and the second beast. See, he's not referring to that. The times of the Gentiles starts with the Greeks. See, that's where it starts at. But when the Messiah is speaking, he's really speaking about the time of the Romans and the time of the 10 toes. See, because the Romans gonna come in first, and then later on, Rome is gonna have a split. They're gonna break up, and then you're gonna have all these different nations. They're gonna come out of Rome. See, and that's why we was talking about the Vandals and the Franks and the Burgundians and all these different people, is because they was the ancient, quote unquote, 10 toes. But we're talking about the more modern 10 toes, which is the European Union. See, so let's go back into this history. It says the scramble for Africa was the invasion, conquest, and colonization of most Africa by 7 Western European powers, driven by the Second Industrial Revolution during the late 19th century and early 20th century, in the era of new imperialism, right? So it says Belgium, France, Germany, United Kingdom. See, that's Britain, Italy, Portugal, Spain. Because look, Belgium, France, Germany, Britain, Italy, Portugal, and Spain. How many is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's 7. See, but they ain't bring in the Netherlands. See, they ain't bring in that. They didn't bring in Greece. See, they didn't bring in those people, because they was a part of the situation too, right? So it says major pre-colonial states in Africa included East Africa states such as Algeria, Abdal, Buganda, Rwanda, Kilwa, and Emirina. See, all these African countries that they started to colonize, right? It says in 1870, of the continent was formerly under European control. 1914, that's during the time of the First World War, right? I think that's like a year in. It says the figure, because in actuality, that's the end. I think the end of the nation, what they would call the Gentiles. That end is going to start with Nebuchadnezzar around 606 BC, and it's going to end 1913 AD. See? And that's during the time of the First World War. But it's not going to go out of existence just like that. Right? So by 1914, I think that's like a year in during what you would call the First World War. So ever since the First World War, the First and the Second World War, we have been dealing with, quote unquote, the downfall of the Gentile world power system, brothers and sisters. This figure has risen to almost 90%. The only states retaining sovereignty were Libya, Ethiopia, Egba, Asa, Senussia, Mabunda, Darvish states, Darfur Sultanate, and Avambo kingdoms. But see, they destabilized Libya, see, and these other states too. They have a foothold in all these states. It's just probably not to the extent where they got, a foothold like in the Congo and stuff like that. But trust and believe, they got a foothold in these states. It says 1884 Berlin Conference regulated European colonization and trade in Africa, and is seen as an emblematic of the scramble. In the last quarter of the 19th century, there was considerable political rivalries between the European empires because they ruling, but they fighting amongst each other too. That's what the whole concept of the European Union was started, so that they can stop fighting each other, which provided the impetus for the colonization. The last year of the 19th century saw a transition from informal imperialism, military influence, and economic dominance to direct rule. With the decline of the European colonial empires in the wake of 2 world wars, most African colonies gained independence during the Cold War and decided to keep their colonial borders in the Organization of African Unity Conference of 1964. Due to the fears of civil wars and regional instability, placing emphasis on Pan-Africanism, right? So let's come out of here and let's go back to the article. It says the General Act of Berlin can be seen as a formalization of the scramble for Africa that was already in full swing. The conference contributed to ushering in a period of heightened colonial activity by European powers, and is sometimes cited as being responsible for the carve up of Africa. However, some scholars warn against overstating its role in the colonial partitioning of Africa, drawing attention to the many bilateral agreements concluded before and after the conference. A 2024 study found that the only borders set at the conference were those of the Congo region, and these were subsequently revised. And the most of Africa's borders did not take their final form until over 2 decades later. W.M. Rogers Lewis conceded, however, that the Berlin Act did have a relevance to the course of partition of Africa. So what are they doing? They're biting up Africa. This is what you would call white supremacy. It says an alternative point of view had been presented that the conference was about denying new weapons to Africa. The machine gun has been recently invented, which at the time was the weapon of mass destruction. And if this could be embargoed to Africa, there would be a possible of a speedy conference. Since embargoes are inevitably broken, it would be essential to act speedily. Ethiopia was able to gain modern weapons from Imperial Russia, which allowed Ethiopia to maintain its independence. So, a lot of people, they talk about how Ethiopia fought against the Italians and they won. Well, how did they win? It's because they telling you that they got a lot of their weapons, from Russia. See, because so in retrospect, Ethiopia is an ally to Russia just as well. It says, the Russian Revolution of 1917 was the death knell of this embargo. It says, European powers were also driven by economic motivation as competition for the vast natural resources on the continent were crucial for industrialization and expansion. As European industries grew, the raw materials such as rubber, minerals, ivories, and cotton made Africa highly valuable. In addition, the control over the vast African market allowed European countries to sell manufactured goods, leading the economic dominance in resources and trade. The Berlin Conference materialized these ambitions, formalizing claims to areas rich in resources and establishing rules to deter conflict among European powers. Economic rivalries between Britain and France increased. The urgency to secure colonies before monopolies were created in key areas such as the Congo Basin. Europe had an industrial surplus, which led them to find markets abroad, making the African colonies both their supplier of raw material as well as consumers of European products. It says 7 of the 14 countries represented: Austria, Hungary, Russia, Denmark, Netherlands, Sweden, Norway, Ottoman Empire, and the United States, right? So what can we see this in scripture? Let's turn to Daniel, the 2nd chapter. Daniel 2. I think it's around the 30 or something. 1 second. Okay. Now check this out. 1 second. Okay. So we in Daniel the 2nd chapter, verses 40. It says, and the 4th kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as iron breaketh in pieces and subdue all things. So what is taking place? Rome is going to cease from being a major government, and it's going to break. See, and you're going to have like these countries, like I say, the Vandals, the Visigoths, the Burgundians, the Suevians, and all these different nations, right, that came up out of the Roman Empire. They're going to metastasize themselves into the nations that we're looking at today. See, we're looking at France, we're looking at Germany, we're looking at Belgium, we're looking at Luxembourg, Britain, not Greece. Greece is an ancient nation, but Greece is a part of the European Union too. So when it says, for as much as iron breaketh in pieces and subdue all things, this is the nations of Europe, right? They're going to come into quote unquote Africa, and they're going to go throughout the world dealing with the people that are not technologically advanced more than they are, and they're going to conquer those people. So when it says as iron that breaketh in pieces, what does that mean? That means that they're going to have the spirit of Rome. See, they're going to have the spirit of Rome. This is why we make the statement that America is the modern day Roman Empire. See, this is why we say that the European Union is the modern day Roman Empire, because they're coming in the spirit of Rome. It says, shall it break in pieces and bruise, talking about what? Rome fell as a government. But the nations today that are ruling, starting around during the Renaissance days of the 1400s, when the Caucasians started to circumnavigate the seas, they started their quest during the 1400s to rule. See, because prior to that, they thought that the earth was flat. See, so it says, and whereas thou sawest the feet and the toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron. See, and what does that mean? That the nations, the toes, they got what? They are part of iron. See, they are part of the spirit of Rome. And see, this is this whole concept of Christianity also. See, they're going to go around the world. They're going to be spreading Christianity, telling the people that they God's people, and they're gonna smother these people and put them in captivity. And see, this is some of the things that they was doing in the interiors of Africa. And see, this is what they did. Like, they came over to Africa and they did what? They took us into captivity. It says, in part of iron, it says, let me read that over. It says, and whereas thou sawest the feet and the toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be in it of the strength of iron. What is that? The strength of Rome. See, it's because the Pope is still the vicar or the ruler of the world today. See, he's coming in the Pope is coming in the spirit of who? See, he's coming in the spirit of Nimrod, y'all. See, that's who he's coming in the spirit of. For as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay, and as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong, talking about the Roman Empire, and partly broken. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, now check this out. This is an impact verse. They shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. So, so when we reading about, like when they talk about the colonization, European colonialism, one thing about European colonialism is the fact that they're going to do what? They're going to inflict the people with Christianity. That's what they're going to do. And this is why the world today believes that Christianity is something that was created by the Israelites. Is because of what you would call the whitewashing and changing of history. Let's look at some other stuff, right? So I had looked up some stuff on Google, and it says, what countries were involved in the slave trade? It says, the Berlin Conference, also known as the Berlin West Africa Conference, involved 14 countries: Austria, Hungary, Belgium, Denmark, France, Germany, Britain, Italy, Netherlands, Ottoman Empire, Portugal, Russia, Spain, Sweden, Norway, and the United States, right? But let's look at some other stuff. It says, let me see. Because I had some other stuff up in here I wanted to deal with. I'll probably just go back to that. Right? Major players: France, Germany, Great Britain, and Portugal were the most influential participants, right? Because I think that Portugal, the Portuguese was like one of the first ones, right? So this is them biting up Africa, and they gonna take us into captivity. So when Yahshua said, Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled, see, he's talking about the rise of Rome and the falling of Rome and the rising of, quote unquote, the 10 toes and the falling of the 10 toes. So we go back into here, we're going to start reading at 40. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as iron breaketh in pieces and subdue all things, and as iron that breaketh all these shall it break in pieces and bruise. Because when we look at Europe today, Europe yesterday was considered the Roman Empire, but we don't see that today anymore. It's because Rome fell as an imperialist country that ruled over everybody, but now we see the strength of Rome, which is embodied in all these different nations today. Whereas thou sawest the feet and the toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron. The kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be in it of the strength of iron. See, when we're looking at Germany, we look at all these European countries, they have the strength of Rome. For as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay, and as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. That's why they keep bringing up this stuff talking about the New World Order. See, because the New World Order is nothing but an acronym that is being floating around talking about what? The old Babylonian mystery system that was headed up by Nimrod, Semiramis, and Tammuz. That's what they talking about. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. Talking about what? They're going to conquer the people. They're gonna inflict the people. They're going to brainwash. They're going to conquer the people. They're going to brainwash their children with Christianity. See? And also we're brainwashed with politics, religion, and social living. That's what it's talking about, how they gonna mingle themselves with the seed of man. They're gonna start coming over to the country. They're gonna be spreading Jesus and all this type of stuff. But in actuality, they use this term in prison. They call it lining you up. Where they'll talk to you or make you seem like they're not a threat towards you to get your guards down. So once you have your guards down, here they come with the knives and the picks and stuff like that. And this is what they did, because they came over here promoting religion, but in actuality, they was the devil. See? But they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with miry clay. One more scripture. Let's turn to Revelation 19. Let me see. Revelation 19, I think is, where we at? I think it's 17. Okay. 19:17, book of Revelation. And I saw an angel standing in the sun, and the sun represents the Babylonian mystery system. See, it's because the Babylonian mystery system is the beacon of light of today. And he cried with a loud voice, saying to all the fowls that fly in the midst of heaven, right? Come and gather yourselves together unto the great supper. And when you talking about the the fowls and stuff like that, this is all the nations that have taken on the strength of Babylon. See, because now they in what you would call they're in a war with each other. See, they're in a war with each other. And this has been going on for a long time. And it says that ye may eat the flesh of the kings and the flesh of the captains and the flesh of the mighty men and the flesh of the horses and them that sit on them and the flesh of all men, both free and bond, both small and great. And I saw the beasts and the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to make war against him that sat on the horse and against his army. See, because when we talking about, they make these statements, oh, they gonna fight against the Creator. You can't fight. You can't see the Creator. You can only see the Creator through people. So even though they don't understand what they saying, what are they saying? How are they fighting the Creator? America is fighting the Creator by fighting the people, the nations that the Creator has risen up against America and her allies. That's why they fighting against the Iranians. This is why they fighting against Russia. This is why they fighting against China. It's because that's the Creator. This is the face of the Creator that's working through the nations to try to topple America. And they gonna do it. So with that being said, brothers and sisters, peace, shalom.